Hey everybody, you guys see me okay? How's the stream looking? How's it sounding? I think I lowered my stream latency too, so it should be a little bit better today. Good. Normal is good, I'll take normal. Yeah, I lowered my stream latency a little bit, so the quality might be a tiny bit lower, but it should be a little bit faster for you guys to see the stream, and interaction can get sped up a little bit that way. Hello everyone. Internet hobo. I don't even know who that is. They're homeless. Hello. I miss you guys. Never thought I'd say it, that I'd miss going to school, but I do. Yeah, it's still like 10 seconds behind, but I think that's pretty normal, if for YouTube at least. Yeah, the lag's pretty minimal. We have a meme of the day. Oh, it's Sarah. Okay, great. So, as people are loading in here, I'm gonna give you guys some sneak previews. You guys are gonna get some. Wow, Nanami, that was harsh. I made this meme on my own. Darn it. So, what I wanted to give you guys some sneak peeks on, as people are getting loaded into the stream and people are still signing on. It's like every second my viewer count's going up. Is what are we going to be doing after the AP test? So for you seniors, pretty much after the AP test, things are winding down. You're basically done. That's cool. But for sophomores and juniors, you still have opportunities for weekly learning to do for AP Euro, right? You have to do what, I don't know. Our school said 5 out of 8, but I think they're going to change that requirement to be something like 7 out of 8 or something. Anyways, you still have a few weeks of work after the AP test, right? So I got some ideas in the works. Obviously, I want to spend a week talking about the Holocaust, which is sad news, but is important news. Nanami, I'm going to get to that in a second, because although our opportunity for weekly learning after the AP test is definitely going to be on the end of World War II, the Holocaust, I was thinking that there might be a way to still do our Cold War board game. I don't know how yet, but I'm gonna look into it. Because how cool would it be if you guys got to still play the board game, but digitally? And I was thinking I don't know how exactly we do this, but I'm a pretty big nerd. Yeah, exactly. I think Tabletop Simulator might be a step too far, because then we need Steam accounts and yada yada. But I'm thinking that there could be something with Roll20 or something like that, where we could get pretty easy participation in a board game of some kind, right? And I think that would be pretty cool. Well, I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but I've got some ideas brewing in the back of this head here about how we might be able to get that to work. So, and I would definitely take any recommendations. Yeah, Hoi 4 game when. Yeah. I'd crush you guys in that game. I play all the nerdy history games. Someone asked me, it's Mr. White, have you ever played this game called Civilization? I'm like, yeah, dude. Have you ever played Age of Empires, Mr. White? Yeah, of course I have. I played all of the nerdy games, okay? I've played every single one of them. Except for RuneScape. I don't play RuneScape. Never have. Or World of Warcraft. I never got into that either. Anyways, so I got a lot of people on the stream. I actually played Minecraft in alpha, because that makes me a hipster. Yeah, pretty cool. Anyways, yeah, Sam, I've played Company of Heroes 2. I've played that. Yeah, yeah. I'm real good at RTS games, guys. I was like high-ranked ladder in StarCraft for a while. Anyways, I'm gonna move on and stop touting my pro gamer skills over here. So we got enough people on the stream that I'm willing to get started here. Today's topic is going to be about writing the DBQ. Your job this week, by the way, is to watch each part of my video series, but I'm going to edit that requirement because I don't think anyone should be forced to watch 2 hours of videos if they don't want to. So if you watch at least one video, I'll take that as a win. Make sure that you complete the AP Euro Readiness Quiz after you watch today's video. I recommend that you watch all 3 videos, but obviously, you know, that's like probably by the time this video is done, and if we add up all the other video times, it's probably like somewhere between 3 to 4 hours. That's pretty rough. So watch as many videos as you can reasonably afford to, and then make sure to do the AP Euro Readiness Quiz afterwards. It's 11 questions. It's real quick. They're not like what you would think they are. The questions are very much so like, when is the AP test? That is one of the questions. So it's just a way for you to, like, and for me to know that you know what's going on, you're in the loop, and I have a literal quiz on Schoology to prove that. So make sure you take that. Next week, I'll give you a heads up right now that next week, your requirement is going to be to just take the AP test and fill out a really short survey after you do. So next week's weekly requirement should be pretty automatic. As long as you don't forget to take like a 5 to 10 question survey that I'll post on Schoology, you'll be fine. So I just want to give you guys the freedom to make sure you're just focusing on the AP tests and you're not worrying about any other additional stuffs. So I don't know what the DBQ topic's going to be. My guess, actually, I would not be surprised if there are multiple DBQ topics. They never do this. They usually have 2 DBQ topics. They have their regular test time DBQ topic, and then they have their makeup test DBQ topic. I have been told that every now and then they have a third DBQ topic. Fun fact, for the people who live in Hawaii who take the AP test, they actually start their AP test well after people on the East Coast are done. Because like normally what happens is the AP Euro test is about 4 hours, and there's a 3-hour time difference between like New York and California, right? So normally it's not a big deal as long as everyone's taking the AP test at the same time. It doesn't matter if the New York City kids get out and immediately tweet the DBQ test question, because the California kids at that point will have already been in the testing room, right? There is an issue with Hawaii. So every now and then some years we'll have 3 DBQ topics to help out those Hawaiian kids. Not that they need any help. They live in Hawaii. That's freaking sweet, man. Like, I'm so jealous. I want to live in Hawaii. But this year, I would not be surprised if there is like 10 DBQ topics floating around. Like, in an effort to make it harder for students to collaborate, I definitely can imagine having multiple different DBQ topics. So they might have some really strange specific DBQs this year. I have no clue. So I would just be ready for anything this year. Don't be surprised that you get a DBQ topic that's like, you know, obscure social trend involving family size in the early modern era, you know? Yeah, I think so too, Nanami. I think everyone's going to get a different DBQ version. I wouldn't be surprised, actually, also, if they maybe have not only a few DBQ topics, but they have, like, 2 different sets of docs for each DBQ. You know what I mean? Where it's like they have one DBQ topic, and there's, like, 20 possible docs you could get with this DBQ topic, and they just randomly assign you 5 or something like that. I think that's another way they could easily crack down on cross-student collaboration. Anyways, the point is don't expect to get the same DBQ as anyone else. So, how do we write the DBQ? As a heads up here, if any of you do any practice DBQs through AD Classroom or anything like that, and you send me those practice DBQs, or you shoot me an email saying like, Mr. White, I'm real desperate. I need a lot of help. I will be happy to grade those. I just need about 48 hours. So I need you guys to send me any DBQs you want graded no later than Sunday night, because I cannot promise that if you send something at Monday at 3 p.m., I can get you that DBQ back. I also don't plan on grading any DBQs after Monday, after Tuesday. So I'll probably grade a few on Tuesday and then send them back to you. But I don't want to be grading DBQs on the day of the test. So if you want to do some practice DBQs, send them to me. Again, please get those done by this Sunday evening. Send them to me no later than Monday morning, and I can hopefully try to go over them. I can't obviously promise that I'll do all of them. If I get 100 emails, I obviously cannot grade 100 DBQs that fast. So it's going to be on a first come first serve basis, and you only get one. So do not send me multiple. You get one DBQ that you want feedback on. So with that being said, how do we write the DBQ? I'm going to really quickly scroll through the comments to see if there isn't anything other than you guys just being weird and yelling at each other. Mostly just personal attacks between students. That's fine. And random memeing. Yeah, and people. Yeah, you guys are no help. Exactly. Cool. That's fine. That's fine. I was just double checking there wasn't like a relevant question hidden in there. Oh, I hope AP asked me to write a DBQ about the motivation of Magellan's crew. Lol. Okay, so let's get to work here. So you guys are going to get a modified DBQ rubric. I really hope you have reviewed this already. I really hope you have watched my 8-minute video on the modified DBQ. I made this video that was exactly 8 minutes long. I talked like a robot in it on purpose. I was trying to sound as scripted as humanly possible so it would be very nice and clear. And I wanted to be pretty quick. 8 minutes for me is pretty quick, as you can imagine, about how I kind of walk through the DBQ. But as a quick review, the DBQ that you're going to get is different. It's not the standard DBQ. It is, first of all, 10 points. And they're only going to give you 5 documents. So there's quite a few changes happening here. The thesis and contextualization point remain the same for your AP Test DBQ. And therefore, your introductory paragraphs, no structural changes are happening there. That's the same old stuff we've been working on all year. And the cool thing about introductory paragraphs is how you do them is the same for both LEQs and DBQs, right? It's contextualization, then your thesis. So in that regard, you guys, I really hope, are solid on those introductory paragraphs. And those first 2 points, you should be comfortable knowing how to earn them. Here's where things are getting different. Your evidence category is going to now, they're going to give you 5 docs, right? And you're going to have to use 4. Now that's actually what we did for our HI5 DBQ, so that's actually good. You're familiar kind of getting 5 documents and using 4. The other news now is it requires 2 pieces of outside evidence for full credit. So this is going to encourage you to have a lot of background knowledge and be ready to pull it out on the fly. So this is where it's really helpful to have some good notes that you can quickly access. I seriously think that it is in your best interest to have maybe a half page or a page of notes in Google Docs for each of the 3 eras, and just Control F your way to whatever topic you want so you can have some quick stuff to pull out, right? Save as much time as humanly possible. If you get a DBQ topic on, I don't know, the Enlightenment, you should be able to hit Control F in your Google Doc, go down to the Enlightenment section and be like, yeah, we're here. Which is why, at minimum, the AP review, like the big AP review guide that you turned in to me on Schoology, you can use that and that should be helpful to you. Assuming you put real effort into that, you'll actually be in a great spot, because I'm pretty sure I cover all the big topics on that. I think I hit almost every major trend they could possibly ask you about. The analysis and reasoning points also have some changes here. They now only require you to source 2 documents as opposed to the traditional 3. But they're also going to give you a point for each one you source. And And they're also going to give you a point for each outside piece of evidence. So there's now 2 points for outside evidence as opposed to 1, and there's 2 points for sourcing as opposed to 1. So that means that partial sourcing, as in like you only source one correctly and then you do another one incorrectly, you'll actually still earn a point. As opposed to the original DBQ's rubric, you have to do 3, and if you do any one of them wrong, it's all or nothing, you miss the point. So this is actually, in my opinion, better. Not only do you have to do less, but you will earn more points if you only get half of it right. The complexity point is exactly the same. If you're wondering where the third and final bonus point is, it's thrown into the evidence category. So previously there's 2 evidence points given on the DBQ. There's using 3 documents and then 6 documents to support an argument. Now, obviously they don't want you to use 6, so they're only going to give you 5. So they're actually going to give you 3 evidence points just for the docs. They have this one that's using just 2 docs, just 4 docs, and then they're actually separating using docs to support an argument into its own special third point. So that's only good news because it's even easier to earn evidence points. So as a kind of summary, the additional 3 points they added to the DBQ, which took it from 7 to 10, it's all scaled in a way that it's actually relatively easy to earn more points now. Danny, to clarify, sourcing is talking about origin and purpose stuff? Yes. Yeah, that means when you kind of give some background into the creation of that document, like what the author is saying, whether the author is biased, what was happening in that time period. Yes, the sourcing stuff you would do on your blue sheet, hence why you've had to do that all year. This has all been prepping you. The whole reason that origin and purpose is in your blue sheet is to prep you for the DBQ. Yes. Yeah, and an A push, they call that HAP. Yes. Okay, so, Emily, when introducing sourcing, would you say directly like the purpose of this or the origin of this is, you could. I never think it's bad to be extra specific, but it certainly isn't required. They can ascertain when you're talking about the background of a document without you quite literally saying the purpose of this document is, but it won't hurt. Like, so therefore, go ahead and do that. Now, yeah, so I'm going to talk about that, Hope. That's a great question. So I'm going to kind of go into some possible essay formats. I want to just start all of this by saying there is no format you must follow. The only thing you need to know is that your thesis needs to be in the first or last paragraph and contextualization needs to be in the first paragraph. Other than that, there are literally no rules about structure. In fact, technically you don't need to write perfectly in beautiful you could have just one gigantic body paragraph that just rants forever, and you cannot lose points for that. So here is my recommendations. My recommendation is you obviously have an introductory paragraph with your contextualization and your thesis. You should always be attempting a thesis in your introductory paragraph. That's not to say that it needs to be perfect, because you can always refine it in the conclusion, but I highly recommend you attempt it in the introductory paragraph. I recommend 2 body paragraphs where you talk about docs and you talk about evidence, okay? Now, you could do 3. You definitely could do 3, especially now that you have outside evidence that you need to include, and you need to include 2 pieces of outside evidence. What you could do is do 2 docs in one paragraph, 2 docs in another paragraph, and then your outside evidence in a third, or mix that up as you please. But what I really mean to say is a minimum of 2 body paragraphs. I don't see a way in which you can get away with 1 body paragraph getting full credit. A nice way of thinking about this, and the reason why I like 2, is because it's a good way to remember all the things you need to do. So each body paragraph addresses 1 concept from the thesis, 2 documents to support your argument, 1 of those docs has to be sourced, and 1 has to have a piece of outside evidence. Everything in terms of the requirements is divisible by 2, right? So it kind of 2 body paragraphs is nice in the sense that you can kind of have an equal amount in each. Now, it doesn't always work out that way. Maybe you're in the middle of your argument, and maybe you have like more stuff on one side than the other, and maybe it makes more sense to do 3 body paragraphs than 2. You have the freedom. I do not want to limit you. I am just telling you with this 2 body paragraphs thing, that it's a useful way in the midst of an essay to keep track of the requirements. If you can keep track of the requirements, you're comfortable with the requirements, please ignore all my advice about number of paragraphs. But I have a feeling that many of you are like, your heads are like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, and this is at minimum some guideline that you can remember, right? So that's my recommendation when it comes to the DBQ format. Complexity point. You are not required to have a counter-argument paragraph. You can easily earn the complexity point without one. That being said, having a whole paragraph dedicated to counter-argument, if done well, will definitely earn you the complexity point. I'm just not sold that it's the most efficient way of earning it. So you can definitely do that, and Hope asked that question, use a third paragraph for the complexity point. But today we will go into how there's a bunch of ways to earn the complexity point, some of which are more time efficient than others. And always, always, always do what you're most comfortable with, but we'll talk about, the obvious role of time today as well. Conclusion, you should do one. You really should. It's optional, but what else is optional? Taking the AP test. You should be taking the AP test if you're watching this video. Otherwise, you've wasted 20 minutes already. So the conclusion is optional in the same way taking the AP test is. Technically, you don't have to do it. But man, oh man, is it stupid at this point not to. The conclusion is a great place for you to refine your thesis and earn any points you missed, right? It's the oh crap, I forgot about this thing, let's do that here, right? And repeat your thesis always there. So today when we go through these different categories, we're actually going to be looking at a few different responses to last year's 2019 AP Euro DBQ. This was last year's 2019 AP Euro DBQ. This was the question that Jean-Luc, you were in AP Euro last year, right? Yeah. Or was it 2 years ago? I can't remember. Anyways, if you were in AP Euro last year, which I don't think many of you were, this is the question you got on the DBQ. Evaluate whether or not the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas in science. And I'm not going to give you all the docs, ain't nobody got time, but when I show you some student responses today, and they are not students from Novi High School. The student responses were collected by AP, and it actually has scoring guidelines from AP. I will show you some of that. And I just want you to keep this this question in mind, so that you know what the general topic of the responses are. So, any just real big overarching questions on format structure? I'm going to go into detail on all the different categories of the DBQ in 1 second, but any big overarching questions before I get into the different elements? Let's take a look. Lucy says, so after you source 2 articles, can you just refer to articles as article 4? I always encourage you, don't use the word articles, use the word docs, because there's a lot of documents that reference articles of yada yada. There are a lot of historical documents called articles of blank or whatever, so just the word article could get confusing. But yeah, you can refer to the docs by number. Definitely. You can call them Doc 1, Doc 2, Doc 3, Doc 4, Doc 5. Will the prompts be specifically harder than the usual DBQ? No, they will not. AP actually made it extremely clear that they are not making anything they are not trying to make anything harder. It may accidentally be harder, but it's not intentional. They are going to try to use the exact same process of writing DBQ questions they've always used. They're not going to adjust the difficulty because you get open notes. They made that promise. Complexity point is just contradiction of your thesis, right? No, there's actually 4 different ways to earn the complexity point. We'll get into that a little bit. Prachi, yes. We'll get to that. Yeah, there's 4 ways, I believe, to earn the complexity point. Something like that, 4 or 5. How long should contextualization be? We'll get to that. That's specific. Any other really broad questions? I don't know. I'll get to the specific stuff about contextualization and complexity in a second. Okay, let's move on. So, let's start with thesis and contextualization. These are 1 point each. So the thesis needs to have 2 things to it. You need to answer the question directly. The easiest way that people lose the thesis point is they just answer the question they want to answer. They don't actually answer the question. In AP Euro lingo and in AP lingo in general, sometimes teachers have been known to write on people's essays just the abbreviation ATFQ. Answer the effing question. Effing meaning freaking question, obviously, right? But please, 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 use the language they do when you answer the question. If they ask a question like this, do not say, Christians generally embraced heliocentric theory in the 1700s. That's vaguely related to the question. Please say whether or not, specifically, whether or not you think the Catholic Church was opposed or not to new ideas in science in the 1600s. Use that exact language clearly. Just answer their question in the words that you like, in the words that they wrote, right? Answer the question. But after you answer the question, establish a line of reasoning, right? So don't just say the Catholic Church was opposed to new ideas in science in the 1600s. Say the Catholic Church was opposed to new ideas in science in the 1600s as evidenced by their yada yada and their choice to blah blah blah, right? Include the concepts you will be discussing in your thesis as a blueprint for your essay, right? That can either be as a separate additional sentence, or it can be just all shoved into one sentence. It doesn't need to be 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. It can be any mixture of that. You just need to answer the question and have a line of reasoning where you explain how you're going to answer that question in the essay. Right. Contextualization. In my opinion, this should go before the thesis. I think it's easier that way. I recommend about 3 sentences or so. The key thing about contextualization is it needs to be more than a passing phrase or reference. You cannot just be like, the Industrial Revolution happened after the Agricultural Revolution and before the World Wars, right? That's not enough. Like, we want to know exactly what's going on here. There's so many ways to earn the contextualization point because you can reference key things happening during that time period that they're talking about, the transition from the previous time period to the one they're talking about, the transition from that time period to the next one, yada yada. There's a lot you can do to earn the contextualization point. You just have to look and sound smart, right? You cannot just give a really, really brief thing and then just expect to earn the point. I think the contextualization is best explained by examples. Annie asked, should we use the question's wording to answer the question? I don't see why not, right? I feel like using the wording of the question is always useful. So let's take a look at some good theses. Martin Luther's, right? No. Let's take a look at some good theses and some good contextualization, and then we'll take a look at some not good theses and contextualization. Remember, the question that these students were asked was whether or not the Catholic Church was opposed to new ideas in science in the 1600s or not. By the way, what argument style is this? Take a moment in chat. And is this a comparison essay, a causation essay, or a continuity in change essay? Give you guys a moment. So what if I said you're all wrong because it's a trick question? So starting a couple years ago, they introduced a new way of asking a DBQ. They introduced contextualization DBQs. Yeah, contextualization was actually the right answer here. And I know you're like, no, that's a subcategory within the DBQ, right? Yeah, they actually, this is nuts. So they will occasionally, this is a kind of question they could ask. They could ask a DBQ question that asks you to evaluate change or continuity over time, cause and effect, similarity or difference, or the context of a time period. That last one is really tricky. It's really confusing. I literally, it was like the last day of school or something. Last year, I was talking to Mr. Franchi because we're buds. And he's like, hey, have you been giving your students any like contextualization LEQs or DBQs? And I was like, yeah, they do it all the time in all their LEQs and DBQs. He's like, no, not like the subcategory contextualization, like where the entire LEQ or DBQ question is framed as contextualization. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, check this out. And he like pulls out the new 2018, 2019 AP changes, and it was like, students can now be asked this kind of question. And I was like, oh no. So I think this is a possibility of something you might get. The good news is these contextualization questions are almost exclusively going to be asked on DBQs, not LEQs, and you only have a DBQ this year anyway, so you know it's going to be a DBQ. And on top of that, you don't really have to change a whole lot about what you're doing. It doesn't actually require any additional work from you as a student to answer this kind of question versus the kind of question that's causation, change, or similarity or difference. It's not any more difficult because you're just going to use the docs to answer it in one way or another. Most of the time, contextualization questions are just going to be asking you, was this time period like this or not, right? If they asked you, is the late 19th century better defined by the rise of objectivity or the rise of subjectivity, that's a contextualization question, right? They're asking you, is this time period like this or is it like this? If they asked you, what were the conditions that made the, evaluate the underlying factor, I don't know, I can't think of a good one right now, never mind. But for the most part, contextualization questions are just going to be asking you, like, basically, is this time period like this or is this time period like that? No, but yeah, Nanami, you are allowed to have nuance in the middle. Yeah, you can definitely get some gray area going on in there. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of give you guys a heads up that you might get a question like this next week. So let's take a look at someone who was responding to this question, who, see if I can, ooh, I'm small, someone who earned the thesis and the contextualization point. So, I'm going to read this out loud because students are notoriously bad at reading other people's handwriting. So this person earned both the points. Keep that in mind. They said, in the 1600s, this is their introductory paragraph, in the 1600s, the Catholic Church was still recovering from a large exodus of its members during the Protestant Reformation. In order to maintain a place in European society, the Church had to address the problem, meaning of the Protestant Reformation. One of the most noticeable responses was the Council of Trent, which ended practices like indulgences and relics, while also reaffirming church doctrine. After this challenge, the Catholic authority occurred? After this challenge to Catholic authority occurred, the scientific revolution blossomed. With this came much conflict between the church and science, mostly relating to the heliocentric model. To a large extent, the Catholic Church... Okay, so now they're getting into their thesis. So, right after it says the word heliocentric model, period, that's when their contextualization stops and their thesis starts. So let's take a look just at their contextualization. So we're going to look at the word model. Everything before that is their contextualization. And let's look at how they earned this point, right? To me, it's pretty obvious that they earned the point, and hopefully it is to you guys. You guys are always so mean to me. What the heck, man? I'm like live streaming to help you out, and you guys are like, Mr. White is like such poop. So anyways, how they earn the point, they earn the point in actually a couple different ways. So notice, first of all, that they're not immediately jumping into the scientific revolution, right? They're going for the long setup here, right? They're going to just start talking about the Protestant Reformation and how that was really kind of the initial problem. And they're talking about how the Catholic Church is still reeling from that and how they had to reform in the Council of Trent. And then, boom, scientific revolution is happening. And that's even more problems for the Catholic Church because now they have to deal with all these scientists, yelling down their throats that, like, the Earth is not the center of the universe. So they're not just using the heliocentric model and conflict between science and the church in their contextualization. They're going to use that preceding period of the Reformation to grab additional contextualization about how the church is in a particularly rough spot right now. And for that reason, this is a really easy point, because they kind of earned it in almost two different ways, right? They earned the contextualization point the moment they were talking about the Reformation and the Council of Trent, but also when they talked about the heliocentric model causing problems for the church. So in that regard, I think you guys could kind of mimic this model in the sense that where you can kind of set up the issues that defined the preceding era and how they inform the issues in the current era, right? So now let's take a look at their thesis. So after the words heliocentric model, let's look at everything below that. Damian giving me that flat earth theory over here. Thanks, Isabel. Someone's being nice to me. Okay. The devil. Ooh, you never know. He's everywhere, I hear, from these Catholic sources. To a large extent, the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to the new ideas expressed by science because they rendered a literal interpretation of Scripture false. However, to a lesser extent, the Church was not opposed to these ideas because some science was clearly observable and being explored by some prominent members of the clergy. So, first of all, this is a really well-written thesis. Second of all, the student's doing two things in their thesis, so let's take a look at them. They are saying, this is like, Nanami, what you were asking, do you have to pick a side or not? This person erred on no, not picking one side and going all in. They're wedging themselves more on one side than another, right? But they're still wedging themselves on mostly a side. They're saying, for the most part, they were opposed to science. And notice that they include a line of reasoning. They say why they're arguing the church is opposed to science. And their reason why the church was opposed to science is because it rendered their interpretation of Scripture false, meaning it contradicted the Bible. If they had just wrote, to a large extent, the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas expressed by science because it contradicted the Bible, period, it would have been the exact same thing without using fancy words like rendered literal interpretation of Scripture. So you don't need those fancy words if you don't want, right? However, and this is that great word that I talk about using, or the word like although, because it sets you up for that nuance. They say, however, to a lesser extent, the church was not opposed to the ideas because some science, not most science, some science was clearly observable and being explored by respected members of the clergy. So they're saying for the most part, science was opposed by the church because it contradicted the Bible. But whenever science didn't contradict the Bible, or respected enough members of the clergy, or obvious enough science was taking place, then it was fine. So what they're saying is the Catholic Church was basically being a little bit hypocritical about science, right? They were letting in the science they liked and getting rid of the science they didn't like, right? I wonder if there's any examples of people only listening to science they like versus the science they don't like in modern day. I don't know. If there's anyone out there who just only listens to the science they like versus the science and not the science they don't like. I guess we'll never know. That's a question for the ages, I guess. But as you can see, this person clearly earned the point. acid, my mom, anti-vaxxers, yeah, the easy targets. We should swallow hand sanitizer. You got him, Damian. Hey, I didn't call out anyone in particular, right? I let it open for interpretation. I'm just looking at what you guys are saying in the comments. So, Mr. White, how could you? So, as you can see here, this person earns the thesis point, right? They have a line of reasoning. You can already see where their argument is going. You can already tell that one body paragraph is going to be about one thing, while another body paragraph is going to be about another. Let's look at what happens when people don't earn the points. In the 1600s came an age of curiosity and exploration within the human mind. The 17th century was preceded by the Enlightenment, which was characterized by new ideas and ideologies that contradicted the government/church. The Enlightenment brought to light and influenced the scientific revolution, which consisted of astronomers and mathematicians coming up with new ways to interpret the world. This wave of new ideas challenged the Catholic Church because it contradicted certain beliefs. First, pause there. That's the end of their contextualization. So, a couple problems with this contextualization. First of all, they repeat themselves a lot, and they don't use too much specific information. It was really cool that the last person, name dropped the Council of Trent, right? They were able to tie in, a little content knowledge to kind of back up that contextualization. This person doesn't. They just name drop the Enlightenment, which is a little bit too broad to look cool. Also, they get it wrong. The Enlightenment happens after the scientific revolution. And the moment you are just, objectively wrong in your contextualization, they're pretty much never going to give you the point. So the person kind of lost them there, right? Second thing that this person did wrong is they mentioned some stuff that just wasn't super clear. It was super vague. When they say something like, which consisted of astronomers and mathematicians coming up with new ways to interpret the world, that is not clear enough. They did not mention something like the heliocentric model. They did not talk about, for example, Galileo inventing the telescope. They just didn't mention any of the actual things invented in that time period. Isabel is saying contextualization, when name dropping is cool. It is cool to name drop in your contextualization, because contextualization is where you show the AP readers that you know your stuff, right? That you know your content, you know this time period. So, flex a little bit, right? Name drop some stuff. Back that contextualization up with some content that you know. So this person didn't earn it because not only were they wrong, but they weren't clear, which means that they were clearly wrong. So, although the scientific revolution challenged the Catholic Church in some ways, the Church was not opposed to new ideas in science in the 1600s because these ideas did not contradict God's plan/beliefs. The discoveries about the Earth are factual and accurate, and finally, because authorities of the Church publicly accepted the new ideas in science. So they're saying the scientific revolution although it challenged the Catholic Church in some ways, although they'll never tell you how it challenged the Church in some ways. Notice that this thesis just leaves that hanging in the air. You don't finish reading this thesis knowing the line of reasoning behind the nuance, right? Where the previous one, you knew, right, that you knew exactly where their nuance was going to go, right? Their nuance was that the Church did not like stuff that went against the Bible, but they didn't mind stuff that wasn't mentioned by the Bible or was super obvious. This person has an although statement that has nothing behind it, right? Although scientific revolution challenged the Catholic Church in some ways, we never get to know what those some ways are. That's a problem, right? Don't hide stuff from your reader. They see right through that. The next thing, and the next reason why they get it wrong, I actually want to read the words from AP about why they missed this point. The response did not earn the thesis point because its attempt to claim that the Church was not opposed to new ideas in science, because these ideas were factual, is historically inaccurate and indefensible. Yeah, you can't be this blatantly wrong, guys, right? This is part of the reason why I never encourage people to go all the way on one side of an argument. Because every now and then, AP will give you one where you're allowed to be kind of hedging on either side, but there could just be one side where if you go all in on it, you're just really wrong, right? If they have a question, they would never do this, but if they had a question that was basically evaluate the extent to which the occupation policies of Nazis were warranted, right? And you just went all in on like everything the Nazis did is defensible. Like, you'd be wrong, right? Like, there are moments where you're just wrong, right? That's just not right. That's not, you can't argue everything, right? Or there's too many people arguing against you, and you just don't have a PhD from any university, so just no one's going to take you seriously. You can't make an indefensible argument, right? Your argument needs to have some sort of nuance if you're going to pick the more complicated side. Like, it is definitely, I think, harder to argue that the church embraced science than the church opposed science. So if you're going to go all in on the church embracing science, it's kind of a mistake, right? You might be able to do some argument where like the church actually did embrace quite a bit of science, but yes, obviously it didn't embrace other science. They might be able to kind of let you do that, but there's no way you can say the church embraced science because it was factual and accurate. Because, by the way, heliocentric theory is not entirely factual and accurate because the universe's center is not really the sun, right? We're part of a larger galaxy, and there's a black hole in the middle of our galaxy, at least we think there is, and our galaxy is one of many galaxies. So Galileo and Copernicus aren't even 100% right. They're only part of the way there. So just don't go all in, right? Just don't go all in too hard. Especially don't go all in too hard and be really wrong. Any questions on thesis and contextualization? Aryan asked, is it better for contextualization to relate to events that happened in the past or the future? It depends. 90% of the time, the past, I think, makes more sense because history only works in one direction, right? No one in history had the benefit of foresight, right? No one in World War I could be like, guys, World War II is happening if we don't fix this, right? No one actually knew that. So in history, you can only draw causality in one direction, right? You can only bring up the past to show causality. Now, on the other hand, let's say you get an AP test question about effects, right? And they ask you about the effects of World War II. Well, in your contextualization, it might be useful then to actually bring up the Cold War more so than the interwar years, right? So in the rare case where you're asked a cause and effect question, or maybe a continuity and change question focusing on change, talking about what happens in the next time period can be helpful to see the change or to see the effects. But for the most part, I would say most of the time talking about the preceding era makes more sense because it can shed light on the current era of the topic. But there's no way that the future can shed light on the present. It can only illuminate how the present may have influenced the future. I don't know if that makes sense the way I said it, but Eleanor, if there's 5 documents that you have to cover both sides of the argument and you have to use 4, will some docs cover both sides? Ideally, all docs cover all sides. They shoot for that. And sometimes it's hard to make the docs work the way you want them to, Eleanor. This is a really good question, by the way. Because sometimes it'll look like one doc is just this clergyman being like, witches are real and a huge problem and they all have to get burned, right? How are you going to use that doc to support the belief that the church embraces science? Well, sometimes you can actually use the sourcing of the doc to help you with that, right? You could talk about how this clergyman is an anomaly or is not respected or was, later maybe like released for being a little bit too gung-ho of an inquisitor. I don't know. But sometimes you can actually use the sourcing in ways to help you, right? If you use the sourcing, you almost always can get docs to work either way, but it's true. Some docs are much easier to use for one side of an argument than another, because that's life. That's how life works. Yeah, so Emily, yes, it's true that documents don't always cover both sides, but AP tries to make them... AP likes to include a bunch of what I would like to think of as like 80-20 documents, right? Documents that are 80% one side, 20% the other. Would the Council of Trent be an outside evidence piece from the last example? Sahithi, yes and no. So to answer your question, Sahithi, you could have used the Council of Trent as outside evidence, but by using it in their contextualization, it can no longer earn the outside evidence point. You can never double dip on like a name drop or a key term. Meaning that if you use any key concepts in your contextualization, or like, blue sheet terms, or, like historical content knowledge in your contextualization, it cannot be used to also earn the outside evidence point. So meaning you should probably know quite a bit of content knowledge, because you're going to have to use some in your contextualization and then some for your 2 outside evidence points. Good question. Next up, evidence. Now, this is the stuff that you guys, this is your bread and butter right here. This is the stuff you guys are real good at. I don't have a lot of worries about you guys getting all 5 of these evidence points. Well, maybe the final outside evidence point can be hard, but the first 3 of these evidence points, I think you guys can all solidly earn. I'm pretty comfortable you'll earn 3 here. Since you're given 5 documents, you need to use 4. And using 2 out of 5, you get a point. Using 4 out of 5, you get a second point. And you get a third point for using 4 out of 5 to support an argument. And considering that many of you will write a thesis and try to support an argument, I think that those 3 evidence points involving the docs will be pretty easy to earn. The final 2 points are from using outside evidence. I'm not going to spend any time talking about how to use docs to support an argument, because you guys know how to do it. I would say like 95% of students on our last DBQ knew how to use docs to support an argument. The only kids who lost points on using docs to support an argument were the same kids who did not have a clear thesis. And in that case, then obviously it's hard to use docs to support an argument if you don't have a clear argument. So I think as long as you get the thesis point, you should be getting 3 evidence points, at minimum. So if you can do good thesis, good contextualization, I don't see there's any way that you cannot get 5 out of 10 points, which is great, and you're on your way to a 3 out of 5 then, which is amazing. So honestly, if you nail the introductory paragraph, at minimum, I feel like you can, include 4 docs to kind of support your argument. You're on your way to like at least a passing grade on the AP test. This is how crucial the thesis is, right? Where if you miss the thesis, you don't have a clear thesis, your argument is not clear, it's super easy to miss that 3rd evidence point, and you're on your way to a 3 out of 10 on the DBQ, which is, not passing. No, hope there is not a way. I just can't take that many pictures. I'm sorry. I would die. I would have to take something like 800 photographs. It would be terrible. Okay, so as opposed to looking at just how to use docs to support an argument, let's look at the using outside evidence in a meaningful way. So this is a person who earned the outside evidence point for this question. Isabel, just check Schoology. I sent you a message actually just like an hour ago. Or maybe 2 hours ago. So let's take a look at this person and how they earned their outside evidence point. So I had to I snipped an excerpt of this, so let me kind of jump straight to where they do it. So they're talking about how the stubbornness of the church, and they're saying no reform was made until way later in history to adjust with societies with current accepted values. They're trying to use an example. They want an outside example of how the church is not embracing science, right? That's where they're at. Yes, Isabel, those were the only comments. They say, furthermore, the Catholic Church established an index of forbidden books that not any Catholic were allowed to read because they did not want their followers to be introduced to new contradicting ideas against the church. So that was actually one sentence proving that you don't need a bajillion sentences to earn the outside evidence point. But it is also an entire sentence dedicated to that, right? This isn't a sentence part, right? They're not just throwing this in haphazardly without any thought. They are dedicating an entire sentence in like 4 to 5 lines here to talking about how first of all, the Index of Forbidden Books is a great name drop, but then they're also saying that shows that the Catholic Church is opposed to science because it's showing that they are literally telling their followers not to read, right? And anytime you tell someone don't read, right, that makes you look a little closed-minded. So this is a great, simple way. This is, I feel like, I hope this kind of motivates you to see that it's not hard to earn outside evidence, right? It's pretty easy to come up with an outside piece of content knowledge that slots into your argument, because there's so much in AP, or there's so much in history that you can call upon. What happens when you attempt but you fail, right? What does not earning the outside evidence point look like? So you sometimes can bring up something that theoretically could earn you the outside evidence point. It is on topic and definitely could tie in here, but you just don't explain it, right? You just name drop and go. Don't do that. This person said other scientists during the 1600s, such as Johannes Kepler, who have had radical ideas about the universe, have not been punished or negatively affected by the Catholic Church, which further supports this argument. So, this person does not earn the outside evidence point because they, first of all, were not clear about which of Johannes Kepler's ideas were radical or not radical. And in general, the lack of an effect does not prove an argument ever, right? That's not a good way to prove an argument. That's not a good kind of logical approach to argumentation, is by saying, well, because this didn't happen, then that's how I know that this is true. It would have, for example, they could have talked about how Johannes Kepler was embraced by the Catholic Church or not, or yada yada. I mean, in reality, Johannes Kepler did have some quarrels with the Catholic Church because he wasn't Catholic, right? Kepler actually also worked in a Protestant court, right? Obviously, Kepler did not get persecuted because Protestants protected him. So not only does this person not really explain Kepler very well, and not only do they not really bring up enough specific information about Kepler, but they're also just kind of wrong about the situations that surrounded Kepler, right? Kepler was in a very different position than Galileo was, right? Galileo and Copernicus were in Italy. They were much more threatened than Kepler was. And these are the kind of things you need to be aware of when you're bringing up your outside evidence, right? You actually need to be familiar with your evidence, right? You need to know what things are so you can use them correctly. So how could they have earned the point in relation to Kepler? Let me see if I can't get their exact comments on it. I think I can. They did not further their argument, is what they said, and it is not sufficient. What are some things they could have brought up about Kepler? Okay, here's a way they could have used Kepler to support their argument. Well, their argument, again, is really annoying. Their argument is that the church embraced science. Oh, so that makes this really difficult. Okay, so deep background on Kepler here. So Kepler, I know because of my background knowledge, I know that Kepler worked for the Holy Roman Empire because he was German. I think that one way they could have used this is they could have said something along the lines that, like, Kepler may have been accepted because of his ties to the Holy Roman Empire. And this is where maybe my content knowledge is a little bit lacking, because I know he lived in Germany, but I can't remember if he lived in Austria or not. I don't know whether he lived and worked for a Protestant or a Catholic prince, but I know he was in Germany, which had this mess of Protestants and Catholics. So I'm not entirely sure how they could have used Kepler to support their argument here, because I just don't know enough about Kepler, to be completely honest. That is not my area of expertise. So sorry if I'm bumming you out, Damian. I just wouldn't use Kepler, right? I would use Copernicus. Copernicus is a great example, but the problem is Copernicus is in the docs, so they couldn't have used Copernicus. So they just, I mean, really, their flaws, their argument sucks. So in general, just know your evidence, right? Be confident that you know how to use that evidence correctly. That's the big takeaway here. Don't just name drop random things and pray for the best. Sourcing. A lot of you actually did quite well in sourcing on the DBQ. You now only need to source 2 documents as opposed to 3, and you earn up to 2 points this way because you earn a point for each correct sourcing. Sourcing includes, yes, Ariane, outside evidence needs to include things that is not in the docs, hence the word outside. Yeah, so if you get a doc on the, like, for example, on the Industrial Revolution DBQ, I had a lot of people trying to use the Factory Act of 1833 as a piece of outside evidence, but it was actually in the docs, so I could not give people the point from that. Yeah, it's annoying, it is, but hence the word outside, right? So if you get a DBQ and you want to use something as outside evidence, you want to name drop something, you need to quickly glance through the docs and double check that it's not already there. Otherwise, it's not outside evidence. It is inside evidence. So, sourcing. You now only need to source 2 documents, and you earn a point for each. As a reminder, sourcing includes, and look at what it says in decision rules, response must explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical or situation, or audience is relevant to your argument. This is key. Don't just randomly tell me fun facts about what bias they might have. You need to then tie that back to how that might affect your argument. So, if you're saying that this person is reliable, that usually will help your argument if you were planning to use that document to support your argument. What's interesting, though, is if the document seems to go against your argument, but then you can use your sourcing to say that they're unreliable, that actually helps your argument, because you were saying that this document, which seems to contradict my thesis, is actually not that reliable, thus my thesis is still cool, right? So you can actually use sourcing in these really neat ways like this, especially in when it comes to bias, to actually shore up docs that are really annoying for your argument, right? You might have, like, you're given 5 docs and 3 help your argument and 2 like severely go against them. You can sometimes use sourcing as long as you do it correctly. Like, you don't want to be like, this historian is unreliable because I hope he is, right? You just don't do that. Like, most of the time secondary sources are pretty reliable. But you can definitely use sourcing to downplay the importance of a document and downplay the damage it could do to your argument by being like, yo, this is a document, could you add out, sorry, I'll answer questions in 1 second. You could use sourcing to sort of downplay the importance of a document and prove again why your argument is best. And yes, Jag, you could also use outside evidence to prove, to kind of prove bias or show other problems, right? And always, outside evidence is great at shoring up those holes you have in your argument. Yes, and Laura, so sourcing is like that additional analysis of a document's background that supports your argument. So let me show you some examples. I always feel like sourcing is easiest to see with examples. So this is a person who earned the point. And where this starts is at the top. This is actually, it's going to talk about a doc, and it includes their sourcing. So they say, to a large extent, the Catholic Church opposed the scientific revolution because it rendered some scripture false, depending on the interpretation. For example, a cardinal of the church named Cardinal Bellarmine, I can't read his name. I think it's, yeah, Bellarmine, or Bellarmine, I don't know, it's Italian, I think. Cardinal Bellarmine once said a response to a monk who practiced science, which essentially stated that the Council of Trent made it illegal to interpret Scripture, quote, against the common consensus of the Holy Fathers, end quote. It is important to note that, as this was a personal letter, the beliefs expressed by Cardinal Bellarmine would probably align closely to his actual beliefs, because the only person reading it would be a single person, not the public, right? So what he's saying is that what this, I don't know if it's a he or she who wrote this, what they're saying is that you can trust that this letter reflects the cardinal's actual theological beliefs because it is not going to be published to the public. As a private letter, there's no reason why the cardinal would hide the cardinal's theological beliefs or adjust them to kind of confirm the church's beliefs, or to conform, that was the word I was looking for, conform to the church's beliefs. This has to be the actual serious beliefs of Cardinal Bellarmine. He seriously believes that you cannot reinterpret Scripture against the common consensus of the Holy Fathers. So they're using sourcing here to tell you that this document is reliable and is actually a reflection of what many Catholic cardinals believed, right? They believed that you cannot have science which goes against the consensus of the Holy Fathers. And if the Holy Fathers' consensus is that the Earth is in the center of the solar system, then Galileo is out of luck. So you use sourcing, right? And this person is using it in the way of bias, right? To kind of just talk about whether or not this doc is useful in your argument or not. Some of you, for example, also you can earn the sourcing point to give some deep background on someone. So for example, on the Industrial Revolution DBQ, there was a document from Robert Owen, and many of you remembered Robert Owen has like a whole section in the textbook. So some of you did sourcing in another way. Many of you didn't even talk about bias when you talked about Robert Owen. You talked about his background as a utopian socialist, thus showing that he was committed to reform because he believed that governments and businesses should take a wider role in helping the welfare of people, and especially children working in factories. And that was not showing any bias, right? You did not attack Robert Owen's credibility or make him sound more credible. Instead, you were giving us some background likely on why Robert Owen was doing what he was doing, and like his personal beliefs. And that also works for sourcing and also backs up the argument that there were people seriously committed to reform in the Industrial Revolution. So you can take sourcing in a couple ways, right? You could talk about bias, you could talk about historical situation, you could talk about their point of view, their purpose in doing something, etc. Arthi asks, if you use sourcing as a way to also use a doc, do the points double up? Can you get both the evidence point and the sourcing point? Not necessarily, but I don't know how you'd even really do that. Like this person right here, on my current slide, they're actually in a way they're doing it separate in here, right? They're saying that, like you can see in the first half of this paragraph, they're saying that Cardinal Bellarmine is stating that the Council of Trent made it illegal to interpret Scripture incorrectly. And in the second half, they're saying why that is kind of reflective of his theological beliefs. I don't necessarily know how sourcing alone could earn you the evidence point. I always recommend like that kind of two-sentence thing. If you remember what I said back kind of in the DBQ structure, whenever you bring up docs, right, there's sort of a 2 to 3 sentence kind of layout that you can use. And this person actually exactly uses it, right? They start with where they're going in this body paragraph, they bring up a doc, and then they bring up the sourcing, right? And they make sure that each has its own separate sentence. I would recommend doing that, Arthi. I would separate things with periods so that it's really clear to AP where you're trying to earn your points. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of someone. Oh, actually, this is annoying. This DBQ, everyone earned the sourcing point. So let me explain an example of how someone didn't earn the sourcing point. A great example of how someone did not earn the sourcing point, I can think of someone on the HI5 DBQ. I will not name names. A way you can fail to earn the sourcing point is you make a statement about bias that is incorrect. You make a statement about background that is incorrect. If you do anything that's incorrect, right, or just historically wrong, you're not going to earn the sourcing point. Or if you don't relate it back to your argument, right? If you just start like talking about, If it's a document of like maybe a speech from Mussolini, right? And not that you'll get one of those because he's not really in our kind of time period that we're working with. But let's say like you had a DBQ on the causes of World War II, and one of them is this very militaristic speech from Mussolini. And you went into the background of who Mussolini is, and you talked about his childhood, and you talked about how he worked as a teacher in the Italian countryside for a few years, as a high school teacher. He actually did. Can you imagine having Mussolini as your high school teacher? Or do you have Mussolini as your high school teacher? No, you don't. But if you just started going into like the deep history of Mussolini's career as a high school teacher and then never related that back to your argument, that's not sourcing. You can't just tell me fun facts about a person's background and then call that sourcing. It needs to be related to your argument and the topic at hand. So, finally, complexity. And before we move on to complexity, any final questions on sourcing? I'll wait a second for the comments to catch up, the video to catch up with the comments, and if you guys have any additional questions on sourcing. Any other additional questions on sourcing? Or does this make sense? Okay. Aryan, is sourcing quoting something and then relating it back to your argument? No. And in general, quoting is never required, nor is it really encouraged. So remember, the evidence points are different than the sourcing points, right? Notice how I have two different sections here. We would actually put any attempt at quoting or paraphrasing in the evidence points, because that's when you're actually using the text of the document to support your argument, right? Sourcing is when you use anything that's technically not in the text of the document, right? You use what you know about maybe how that document was created. You know something about who it's by, or you know something about the credibility of the document. So just think, whenever you're quoting or paraphrasing, that's the evidence points that's bringing up docs to support your argument directly, right? You're using the actual text of the document to support your argument, where sourcing is like you're using the kind of background knowledge of the document or the existence of the document to either support or not support your argument. Yeah, and Nanami's right. There's usually some pretty useful information on the source line for each document. Never forget to read that, right? That is crucial stuff. They'll usually give you background on their occupation, what time period, or some other crucial tips. Can you use outside sourcing then to bring up values and limitations of a doc? Yeah, but just remember then it won't count for outside evidence, right? Because you can never double dip, right? A one line in your essay can never earn you 2 points. So if you bring up outside special evidence, you know, that help, like if you know some really cool stuff just because you've been like, you know, randomly reading primary sources from like the 17th century and all of a sudden you get one and you like just know some great stuff, you won't be able to use that as your outside evidence if you then use that evidence for sourcing. You can never earn your points twice. So you'll just need to know more. All right, so let's talk about complexity. This is the hardest point to get, actually, on the whole AP test. That's backed by data. Historically, this has been the hardest point for students to get. Makes sense that the complexity point is the hardest to get, right? It's complex. It doesn't have to be the hardest point to get. And I wonder if a lot of people are not earning the point because they don't know what point they're trying to earn. Because the thing about the complexity point is you can earn it in 5 different ways, as you can see from the 5 different bullet points. Now, technically, nothing has changed from the complexity point from this year to last year. So these 5 ways are all still on the table. You can explain nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables. That bullet point is so confusing. It is the shortest bullet point in terms of words, right? But it makes the least sense out of all of these. That first bullet point, I like to think of it as the brilliant writer point. If they read your essay and you're just so nuanced, you're so smart, you're going into so many things, they might just give you the complexity point simply based on how nuanced and amazing your essay is. Do not expect to earn the complexity point that way. Please do not just think that you're going to earn the complexity point because you're just that nuanced. Maybe you are. Likely you aren't. So let's look at the more concrete ways to earn the complexity point. Yeah, Eleanor, right. He was saying like 2% of the complexity point. That's inaccurate because technically 6% of people earn both the analysis and reasoning points, so at minimum 6% of people have to earn the complexity point. But yeah, it's not a lot, right? It's like 1 in 10, maybe. So this is because I think a lot of people do not know how they want to earn the complexity point, so they're never really super clear. So I would recommend choosing one of those other 4 bullet points and gunning for one of those. And I think it's the middle 3. Are the easiest. Specifically, I like the second one a lot. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So the second bullet point is explaining both similarity or difference, or both continuity change, or multiple causes, or both cause and effect. So if you get a question that's a causes question, right? Like what caused this? If you then spend some time talking about the effects of that thing, you'll earn the complexity point because you're showing both sides of the argument. If you have a question asking you to compare two things further like how similar are these things, and then you bring up some crucial differences, that could earn you the complexity point. This is what I like to call like that counter argument one, right? This is where you bring up that other end of the essay and you acknowledge, right, the other side of your thesis, right? And you do it in a way that doesn't discount your thesis, but you bring up continuity in the face of change. You bring up cause amidst all of these effects. You bring up similarity in the midst of many differences, right? So that's that kind of counter-argument bullet point. And that one, you would want to make sure it doesn't discount your thesis. And a lot of students have been doing this in their conclusion. You don't have to do it in your conclusion. It can actually be spread out in your body paragraphs. It does not have to be in one place, all right? Yeah, it's continuing the although statement. That's exactly right, Tom Culp. It's finishing that although thought. And I think the safest place to do this is in the conclusion, but again, you don't have to. Third bullet point. This third one actually used to be a requirement. It used to be called the synthesis point. This third way of earning complexity is if you make an insightful cross-period connection that is accurate. And this is the trick, the accurate one. So many students try to earn the complexity point via synthesis, meaning making a connection across periods, and their connection just sucks. So a great example of a synthesis point is, let's say you got the DBQ question of, and it was the DBQ question of what caused World War II. I mean, what a question they'll never give you because it's just way too easy to talk about that in a smart way. And they give you all these docs in the interwar years, and they give you a doc on the Treaty of Versailles. Maybe even evaluate the extent to which the Treaty of Versailles caused World War II, right? Like a real real throwaway easy question. A great example of how you might earn a synthesis point on that such question is you might mention that if the Treaty of Versailles had been more like the Congress of Vienna or the Treaty of Westphalia and not punished the loser so much, maybe Germany would not have been in such a bad position. That's a great example of a very accurate synthesis, right? Because you are connecting it to another time period, and it's actually really on point, and it makes a lot of sense. What you want to avoid doing is being like, the Enlightenment's a lot like the Cold War because it happened, right? No, you can't just relate these two things that are not different and just say some stuff and hope that people believe you, right? Jag, would you be able to connect the French Revolution and Communist Russia? Maybe not, because if you talked about Stalin, I'd say no. There's very little connection, in my opinion, between the French Revolution and Stalin. But if you were to talk about the actual, few years Lenin is in charge and the actual revolution itself, sure, there could be some interesting connections between the French Revolution and the French Commune of 1871, and the Russian Revolution. You'd have to get real specific, right? Because if you're ever too broad, you might lose the reader. So that third point is sometimes easy, right? Sometimes it just pops up in your head, right? You're like, oh my God, what a brilliant connection for me to include in my conclusion. That works, right? Don't ever force it though. If you try to force this third bullet point, you're gonna have a bad time. If you try to make connections that just don't exist or are just murky or questionable, you're not gonna get the point. In which case it was probably better to do more of a counter-argument thing. So in my opinion, this third bullet point for complexity is sometimes it's easier when it pops into your head, when you see that connection, I think it's actually easier to pull off than your counter-argument. But sometimes it's just not there, right? You can't think of one, and then you probably shouldn't try to force it. Yeah, like Napoleon and Hitler and using nationalism, sure, to try to invade Russia and fail, yeah. Fourth one, yeah. Confirming the validity of an argument by corroborating multiple perspectives across themes. This fourth way of earning the complexity point sounds so confusing, but it's actually not. What the fourth bullet point means is you have a very thematical argument, right? As in, you might get a question, let's say it's the question of this one. Evaluate whether or not the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas in science, right? This one is hard to use multiple themes because the question is all about science, right? So sometimes the questions, when the questions themselves are very thematic in how they want you to approach it, it can be hard to earn the complexity point in this fourth way. I think that, though, if you had a causation question on the French Revolution, let me scooch forward here. Here we go. Let's say you had a causation question on what caused the French Revolution. All of a sudden, it's easier to earn the complexity point in that fourth way. Because you could have a whole paragraph talking about the political causes of the French Revolution versus the social causes of the French Revolution versus the economic, financial causes of the French Revolution. And you could be able to talk about things like the role of public opinion causing the tennis court oath, the famine causing peasants to revolt, and the estate system causing, social class to be a hot mess in France. By having your argument structured thematically between politics, social class, and finance and famine, that would actually, in of itself, just structuring your argument in that way without any additional writing would just earn that fourth complexity point. Because you're showing me a very thematic argument, right? Your argument about what caused the French Revolution is confirmed because you are examining the causes of the French Revolution through multiple different themes. But be aware that sometimes it's hard to include multiple themes when the essay question in of itself encourages you to stay inside one theme, right? If the question was, what are the political causes of the French Revolution, how do you examine multiple themes, right? So this is why they give you multiple options for the complexity point, because they can't promise that every DBQ question can easily be done in all 5 of these ways. Sometimes it's just real darn hard to earn the complexity point in all of these ways. Finally, qualifying or modifying an argument by considering diverse or alternate views or evidence. This is another style of counter-argument. So for example, look at the second bullet point on here, explaining both similarity and difference, both continuity and change, multiple causes, or cause and effect. How do you do that with this? You don't, right? It's impossible, because that's not the kind of question this is. You cannot examine cause and effect here, because there is no cause and effect here. You can't examine similarity or difference, because there is none. You can't do continuity or change, really, because there isn't really any of that either. But what you can do is this 5th bullet point in complexity. Consider diverse or alternative views of evidence. So that 5th bullet point is just another style of counter-argument. As opposed to doing like the other side of the argumentation style, it's just a different kind of counter-argument. It's just counter-argument that just is using different evidence. to arrive at a different conclusion. So it's just another way of doing counterargument. So with that being said, that means that bullet points 2 and 5 together mean that a counterargument is always a safe way of earning the complexity point. So there's always, at minimum, you can use counterarguments to earn the complexity point. But sometimes you can earn the complexity point by doing a connection or by having a thematically based argument. So those would be my 3 ways of earning the complexity point. Counterargument, which is covered in bullets 2 and 5. Synthesis, meaning a connection across periods, which is bullet point number 3. And thematically structuring your argument. That's bullet point number 4. Again, do not think you will earn bullet point number 1. It's too misleading, it's too confusing, and it is literally thrown in there for graders to have a lot of discretion. Bullet number 1 is the most discretionary point in the entire DBQ. Complexity point, bullet number 1. Yeah, that one right there leads to the most questions that graders ever get, the most debates between graders, and it is the most subjective possible way of earning a point on the AP test. It is very much so just based on how a grader is feeling about your essay. So just don't try to earn it that way. I'm going to try to pull up the pop-out chat because my chat just crashed for some reason. So I will show you some examples. I saw Maria ask, can you show some examples? Yeah, so let's do that. So let's kind of walk through some examples for the complexity point. So how did this person earn the point? So they said, and what does AP say? So this person says, to a lesser extent, the church was not opposed to science because some science could easily be proven and some clergy were approaching science with less hostility. One such clergyman wrote an essay titled An Epistle Concerning the Pythagorean. His name was Foscarini, and he was both a monk and a scientist, a hypocritical combination. By the way, not really a hypocritical combination. Actually, all science in the Middle Age was done by monks, pretty much. The essence of his writing is that educated people find all sorts of problems with Ptolemaic models. So there's probably a better model out there, like Copernicus's. However, it's important to note that because this monk is also a scientist, he is clearly not completely an obedient example of a Catholic and is a little bit biased, right? He's not going to be super stooped in church doctrine. Another clergyman, Maria Celeste Galilei, a nun, shows that the church does end up supporting Galileo in her letter to Galileo. She says that Cardinal who became Pope highly valued Galileo's ideas. With Maria Galilei, it is important to realize that she is Galileo's daughter, causing her to lean toward her father's radical ideas. And so the reason why I'm bringing up this excerpt for complexity is it says, the response earned the complexity point for a nuanced argument on the motivations and perspectives of the various groups within the church, as well as those beyond the confines of the church, as empirical evidence became more accepted over time. This student earned that strange first bullet point. Because what they did here in this portion of this passage is they brought up how there's different there's basically competing notions of how science should be understood within the church, right? They're showing you that some scientists were accepted when other scientists weren't, and there wasn't always clear delineation about why. Sometimes it was because they had political connections. Sometimes it was because they were able to stylize their science to make it sound like it was supported by the Bible, even though it was reviving things from the Bible. They're making a pretty kind of next level argument here. They're being very, very nuanced, and so the grader gave them the point for this. So this is like an actual way you can see the people earning the nuance point. And if you're wondering, I don't really see how they earn the nuance point, that's what I'm saying too. It's not always super clear what earns the nuance point versus what doesn't. This person did, but this is not always the ideal way of earning it because it's not the most easy thing to repeat or to study or to practice for. It sort of demands that you really understand what's going on, and sometimes you're just gonna get docs that they're not working for you, right? This is not maybe a topic you know. So never rely on this being the way of earning the complexity point, but be aware that you could earn the complexity point this way. This is an example of someone who missed the point. They said, as clearly demonstrated by several historical documents, the Catholic Church was not opposed to new ideas in the 1600s because authority figures of the Church approved of the research. The advances were factual and accurate, and they did not contradict the teachings of God. This argument can be compared with the time periods of the Enlightenment, in which philosophers publicly proposing new ideas to reform the government. Although in this case the Church did not oppose scientific advances, the government authorities did approve of the Enlightenment thinkers and their teachings. So this person is going for a connection between the scientific revolution and the Church's supposed embracement of the scientific revolution, and the connection would be to the Enlightenment. This person, it's just so like, you just want to hit your head, right? It's because this person they miss the point here because they're just wrong, right? What's so sad, right, is that there was a connection with the Enlightenment here, but they just did it all wrong, right? The obvious connection between the scientific revolution, the Church, and the Enlightenment is that although the Enlightenment was basically scientific revolution 2.0, but as opposed to it getting shut down by the Church, it was instead just embraced by secular governments. So example, scientific revolution, they tried this stuff, but Galileo was put on trial, right? It doesn't have that much success because governments don't embrace the science. But then when we get to the enlightened monarchs like Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, we see monarchs actively embracing these rational scientific arguments about freedom of speech, about an end to torture and cruel punishment, and so they actually change public policy to be more in line with the modern rational scientific thinking. Except for that's not what they wrote, right? They did the opposite. They said that the Church embraced science, but governments didn't, and that's the exact opposite of what really happened. So although their connection was like, there was definitely a way to make that connection work, they just did it 100% wrong. So I hope that kind of makes sense, how you can kind of see these different kind of things. Can you tie an outside evidence point with a complexity point? Yes and no. As in, like, it depends on how you do it. As in, like, you cannot just have your outside evidence point earn your complexity point, but you could bring up your outside evidence again when you're trying to earn the complexity point, and then now use it in a new way to earn that complexity point. Is it cool to say just say some may argue? No, it is not cool to just say some may argue, because no one knows who those some are. You must make it clear. I never think in counter arguments it's good to say some may argue. It's good if you can actually, name drop and mention the historians that are having different arguments than you. But because you might not always get that, it's better to just cut straight to the source and just say things like, although there are clearly examples of the Church embracing science, there are far more examples of the Church not embracing science. Yeah, even it could be argued that that's better, I think, because you're not mentioning a sum that you refuse to define. But in general, I would just say don't worry too much about the phrase, just worry about the substance, right? Worry less about how you phrase your counter-argument and worry more about actually what is your counter-argument. What is the real substance of your counter-argument? Because if your substance is good, AP will forgive you for bad phrasing. They don't care about phrasing. I can't tell you how many times in this essay that scored 7 out of 7, they spell Galileo like 4 different times in the essay, right? Like, they cannot figure out how to spell Galileo. They wrote Galileo at one point, then they wrote Galilei at one point. They don't care about your phrasing or your spelling. They care about the substance of your argument. So, any questions about all this? I'm sure there's probably still some complexity questions, but I'm going to open it up for everything at this point. Any questions you guys have that you're dying to ask me? take a little question break, and then this will be the last thing for us. Yeah, we're done after this. Any lingering DBQ questions that you're needing an answer for? Can you talk about stuff after 1914? Yes, you can. Yep. How many points do you think will earn us a 5? I don't know, but I would be shocked if 9 points didn't earn a 5. There's no way that you have to get a perfect score to earn a 5. It's got to be 9 to 10, maybe even 8 to 10. In what part of the DBQ do you recommend we write the counterclaim? Emma, you should have some nuance in your thesis, which you can then address maybe in your conclusion, possibly in your second body paragraph. It's up to the docs, right? What if for some reason, Emma, like you can only figure out a way for 3 of your docs to support your argument? Well, then you might find yourself doing a counterclaim for your 4th document, right? In which case that counterclaim may just show up in like a second body paragraph. But if maybe all 4 docs clearly support your argument, you might have to kind of come up with a counterclaim and then shove it in your conclusion. So it's really up to the docs to dictate where it's going to be in your argument. Complexity is not just having an all-those statement, but backing it up. Yeah, it cannot just be an all-those statement in your thesis. It's not going to be enough. Again, as a repeat, complexity does not have to be counter-argument. There are a few ways to earn complexity. Bullet points 2 and 5 are basically counter-arguments, right? Qualifying or modifying an argument. But bullet point 3 is a cross-period connection. That's another way of earning complexity without a counter-argument. And bullet point number 4 is organizing your essay by theme. If you do that correctly, then no, you don't need a counter-argument at all. So you really have 3 ways. The safest, I think, is a counter-argument. Either explaining similarity and difference, continuity/change, or whatever. The second way is a cross-period connection that's accurate and insightful. And the third way that's safe is to organize your essay by theme. Are these example DBQs on College Board? Yes, they are. I grabbed this. These are publicly available documents with publicly available scoring guidelines on them. Yep. They have some stuff from earlier years, too. This is just the 2019 stuff that I decided to pull up today. If we combine what they give us in the source description and another sentence of analysis, would that be optimal? I don't necessarily know what you're referring to, Ifan. Are you referring for sourcing? Or are you talking about complexity, which is what everyone else was talking about? Yeah, for sourcing, definitely. I definitely think that using what's in the source line with a sentence of analysis is exactly what they want. Yep. Yes, Rishi, that's correct. The formatting doesn't actually matter. My recommendation is just to keep things simple and neat in your head. But if your head is complete and utter chaos like mine is on a daily basis, then you do that, man. They do not care about how you organize your essay, except the thesis needs to be in the first or the last paragraph, and the contextualization needs to be in the first. How you organize your evidence is up to you. I'm just giving recommendations to keep it simple. I'm not demanding that you do it in a certain way. And they aren't either. Dugus? Degus? Dagus? Yeah, we can have a sign off with my dog, definitely. So I will go grab my pup. If you have any other questions, I'll make sure to answer those. And shoot me any questions via email. Have me grade DBQs if you want. Shoot me an email and just ask politely. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys are more comfortable with the DBQ than you were before. Okay, I'm going to go get the dog. Good night. Ooh, I smell banana bread. Here, order back. Okay. Here is my honey bear. Ah, this is my honey bunny bear. This is her. Oh, for Victoria and Rishi, yes and no, as in some of them have, some of them haven't. They should be coming out soon. So, Luna wishes you all good luck. Ain't that right, Luna? Say something, Luis. Luna, wish them good luck. Here, Luna, lick my finger if you want them to do well. Oh no, Luna, do you hate them? No? What? You always lick my finger. Oh, I guess she wants you guys to fail. Sorry, guys. Oh, no, she's got a happy smiley face. There she goes. Okay, we're good. We're good. Good omen happened, finally. Okay, we're good. Alright, now she's like ready to fall asleep on me because she's really tired because we played and we took her on a walk. Okay, so take care, you guys. Good luck. Let me know if I can be of any help to you in any other way. I'll send you guys a heart. I hope you all are well, and let me know if I can be any help. Okay? Mr. White signing off. It's been a good 3 days of live stream. I will let you get back to your lives. Don't forget to do the AP readiness quiz. And, yep, good luck. And I'm here for you if you need me in any way. All right. I'll see you guys. Have a good one.